Why was a 22-year-old logistics clerk about to rewrite the rules of a base that prided itself on perfection? No one at training facility knew her name beyond the equipment logs. No one paid attention when she signed in early each morning, her uniform pressed, her hair tied back in quiet regulation. She was background, necessary, invisible, but there was something they hadn't seen yet, something she hadn't shown them. The crack of the .50 still lingered in memory, the sound of thunder captured in steel. But before that day came, before Major's wrist snapped and his pride shattered, lived in shadows. Her life was not written in headlines or medals. It was written in silence, in patience, in the long discipline of someone who knew the difference between waiting and wasting. Each dawn in the Austrian Alps looked the same. The mountains caught fire with the first light, painting jagged peaks in gold. The base stirred with a rhythm so predictable it might as well have been carved into the concrete. Instructors arrived by 6, cadets by 6:30, drills rolling forward like clockwork. And in that mechanical world, slipped inside the armory at 5:30, every day, for 11 straight months. The armory was her world. Rows of rifles gleamed under fluorescent light, each tag numbered, accounted for. Sidearms, long-range rifles, scopes worth more than some officers' yearly pay. Every piece had its place, and she knew them all like old friends. Serial numbers sat in her memory like lyrics of a song. The weapons responded to her touch as though they recognized her. She ran her fingers over this massive frame as if reading Braille, tracing its weight, its promise, its secrets. But she wasn't authorized to fire it. She wasn't even authorized to hold it longer than maintenance required. That was for the warriors, the chosen. She was just the clerk, the specialist who counted, logged, repaired. The woman who made sure their rifles never jammed and their scopes were true. To them, she was a shadow with a clipboard. And yet, when the base fell quiet, when the paperwork was complete and the last rifle returned, she lingered. She disassembled, reassembled, calibrated. She memorized ballistics like scripture, traced the curve of bullet drop charts until she could see them behind her eyelids at night. She understood windage, elevation, atmospheric pressure, as though her bones had been wired to the mathematics of distance. She knew how to zero a rifle with no instruments at all. Her supervisor, sergeant, thought she was just thorough. "Best equipment specialist I've seen in years," he told visitors, smiling with genuine pride. "Never lost a piece of gear, never missed a detail, absolutely reliable." He meant it as praise, and it was, but it boxed her in. To him, she was not a soldier, not a marksman, just an administrator with obsessive neatness. And Major, the senior instructor, embodied the wall she could not climb. 15 years of combat tour had forged his reputation, his philosophy hardened like stone. "Precision shooting," he lectured often, his hand on the as if it were an altar, "is a warrior's art. It's not for enthusiasts, not for dreamers, not for clerks." His students revered him, feared him, obeyed him. And if he didn't see you, you did not exist. Heard those words through the glass every week. She stood on the other side of the armory window, watching officers fumble with concepts she had already mastered. She watched them miss shots she could have made. She watched shake his head, lecture, demand better. She said nothing. She was the girl with the clipboard. But what no one knew, what she told no one, was that she was training in secret. Every weekend she drove 2 hours to her uncle's land in the countryside. Had been a sniper once, a soldier who had known the silence between heartbeats when life and death balanced on a trigger pull. He had recognized something in his niece years ago, a hunger, a discipline. And so, in quiet, private sessions, he gave her what the base would not, the chance to prove herself. Under his eyes she fired her first. The recoil thundered through her shoulders, her body folding against its violence. Only smiled. "Respect it," he said, "or it will break you." She learned to breathe not with her lungs but with her pulse, to let shots fall in the half-second between beats, to feel wind not just in her hair but in the grass 1,000 meters away. Taught her things most soldiers never knew. How cold thickened metal, how altitude changed powder burn, how the earth itself curved beneath a bullet in flight. She fired 300 rounds from that over months, until the weapon no longer intimidated her, until the sound became music, the rhythm of certainty. Back on base, she returned to silence. Her hands moved over rifles with the calm of a priest tending relics. She logged, checked, adjusted, and every time her colleagues thanked her, they never realized she was correcting their mistakes, compensating for their ignorance. She would smile politely, then watch as they walked out to the range to fail in ways she would never allow herself to fail. That gap between what she was allowed to be and what she already was gnawed at her. Instructors praised men for hitting groupings she had months ago. Officers requested scopes they didn't know how to use. And when she explained technical details, they nodded, but only as if she were repeating something she had read in a manual. They didn't hear the experience in her voice. What ate at her most were the meetings. Every month, she sat quietly in the corner, taking notes as instructors decided who would move forward, who would be sent to advanced sniper programs across Europe. She listened as they praised Lieutenant for grouping 8 inches at 600 meters. She had grouped 4 at 800. She listened as they approved Sergeant for excellent wind judgment, knowing she could read grass movement in ways he didn't even understand. And always they talked about her, but only as the clerk, keeps the armory flawless, would say, is reliable, is efficient, never capable, never exceptional. The silence of being unseen was louder than any rifle's crack. Still, she endured it. She carried her secret training like a hidden flame. She told herself it was enough, that mastery, even if unseen, was its own reward. But human beings are not built to be invisible forever. Passion demands recognition, even if it comes by accident. Her breaking point came slowly. It came in the laughter of young officers who dismissed her knowledge. It came in the arrogant swagger of Lieutenant, newly assigned and loudly incompetent. It came in the smirk he gave her one afternoon when she corrected his misuse of a scope, only for him to tell the class later the same correction as if it were his discovery. She bit her tongue until it bled. And still she stayed silent. But silence is a fuse, and all fuses burn down. That spring morning, when reached for the brushing past her without a glance, she felt something shift. He took the weapon like he owned it, like no one else in the room mattered. She had zeroed it. She had calibrated it. And when he dismissed her, when he made her absence louder than her presence, something inside her snapped back into place. The moment came fast. His hand, his arrogance, his dismissal. 3 seconds later, he was on his knees, clutching a broken wrist, staring up at the girl who should have been invisible, and lifted the to her shoulder with a steadiness that silenced the range. The target stretched 1,200 meters across the valley. The mountains held their breath, and one by one she made them hers. 21 shots, 21 kills, flawless. The sound of the last shot faded into the alpine air. When she lowered her eyes were calm. She had not proved them wrong. She had proved herself right. But no one knew yet the truth of how she had come to that moment. The humiliations, the patience, the hidden hours in the cold with her uncle. To them, it looked like an explosion. To her, it was the quietest, most inevitable thing in the world. And as silence fell over, stood alone, not invisible anymore, but undeniable. How long can silence last before it becomes unbearable? On that alpine range, after the final echo of the faded into the mountains, no one spoke. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. A young woman who should have been invisible had just rewritten the story of the base with 21 flawless shots, and the weight of that reality crushed the air from every chest. Major cradled his broken wrist, his jaw set tight against the pain. His eyes didn't leave, not the weapon, not the targets, her. It was as though the weapon itself had vanished, and what stood before him was a contradiction too sharp to ignore. Around them, officers shifted uneasily. Some whispered, others stared openly. Sergeant, her supervisor, the man who had praised her reliability for months, looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. And perhaps he was, because no one had ever imagined this possibility. The rule was simple. Logistics personnel kept the machine running. Combat personnel carried the weight of war. The distinction was never questioned. But now, the machine itself had walked onto the firing line and shown them all how blind they had been. Set the down with quiet care as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Her chest rose and fell in calm rhythm, her face unreadable. But inside her, emotions roared like wildfire: relief, vindication, fear. She had broken through the walls that had contained her, but walls don't fall quietly. They collapse with dust and rubble, and everyone breathes it in. The first to break the silence was Lieutenant. He laughed. It was sharp, brittle, a sound of denial disguised as humor. "Impressive," he said loudly, his tone dipped in sarcasm. "But trick shots don't make a soldier. Anyone can get lucky on a calm morning." His words echoed against the valley walls, but no one truly believed them. Didn't answer, she didn't need to. The targets stood as witnesses, silent and absolute. But inside, her stomach turned. She knew what came next. Recognition was never free. It demanded payment, in envy, in suspicion, in the kind of scrutiny that left no part of you untouched. The system that had ignored her could not easily admit it had been wrong, and men like him would not let this moment pass without a fight. That night, lying on the narrow cot in her quarters, she stared at the ceiling. The barracks were quiet, but whispers carried. She heard her name, fragments of conversation, laughter tinged with disbelief. Some voices held admiration, others doubt, and beneath it all she felt the shift. The invisible girl had stepped into the light, and the light burned. She thought of her uncle. He had warned her of this. "Talent is a blade," he'd said once, cleaning his old rifle by lantern glow. "If you draw it, people will respect it, but they will also fear it, and fear turns quickly into resistance." She had believed him, but believing was nothing like feeling it. Tonight she felt it. The following days were proof. Called for her in the administrative office. His arm was bound, his pride unbound. He asked questions not with curiosity but with accusation. "Where did you learn that? Who trained you? Don't tell me it was manuals. Don't insult me." His tone was sharp, controlled, the voice of a man who could not allow what he saw to be true. Stood at attention, her eyes steady. "Sir, my uncle trained me. Spanish Army, sniper, Afghanistan tour. I've been training privately with him for months." The admission hung in the air like smoke. Unauthorized, off the books, unregulated. His face tightened. "Do you understand what you're saying? That's not official training, that's not recognized. That's not—" He stopped himself, searching for the words that could contain her, bind her back into the role she had just shattered. "This base has standards, structure, protocols. You don't just leapfrog into excellence because of some hobby with a family member." Her jaw clenched, but she kept her voice level. "Sir, it isn't a hobby, it's discipline, it's knowledge, and it's results. You saw them." That was the unanswerable truth. He had seen them, everyone had. But institutions don't bend easily. They resist. They preserve themselves even against truth. And so began the quiet war. Noticed it in small ways. Requests for her presence at meetings increased, but always as a point of challenge, not respect. Instructors questioned her reports more sharply, asking her to justify details no one else was ever asked to explain. When ammunition logs showed discrepancies, suspicion drifted toward her, though her records remained flawless. And made her his personal mission. Every conversation became a battlefield. Every technical point he challenged. Every quiet assertion he undermined with louder confidence. His failures on the range were excused by circumstance. Her successes were dismissed as flukes. Still, she held her ground. She let her work speak. She let her calm silence be the answer to their noise. But silence could not last forever. The base was scheduled to host NATO observers, a showcase of precision training, a performance meant to justify funding and prestige. Still bitter, still grasping for control, selected lieutenant to lead the demonstration. It was a decision born of arrogance and blindness. Prepared the weapons, as always, with meticulous care. She zeroed scopes, measured conditions, adjusted for wind. She gave her calculations, clean and precise. He barely glanced at them. The demonstration was a disaster. Missed target after target, his technique unraveling under the eyes of men and women who could tell the difference between skill and theater. His explanations confused the observers. His confidence cracked, and his reputation faltered in real time. Stood in the equipment station, her hands clenched behind her back, her heart aching with the knowledge that she could have saved them, that she could have shown them what precision truly meant. But no one had asked her. No one had believed she belonged. Afterward in the debrief, his anger searched for a place to land. He found it in her. The equipment wasn't properly prepared. The scopes weren't clear. The ammunition inconsistent. Administrative failures compromised the demonstration. It was a lie, a deflection, but it was power speaking. Met his gaze, steady and calm, though inside her chest burned. Sir, the equipment was flawless, documented. The problem was not the tools, it was the hands that held them. The room froze, officers shifted uncomfortably, eyes narrowed, face darkened. In that moment, knew she had crossed a line, not in what she said, but in daring to speak it aloud. She had taken the truth that everyone wanted hidden and laid it bare, and truth is a dangerous weapon. That night she walked alone across the base, the alpine air biting, the stars sharp above the peaks. She thought again of his words. A marksman's greatest weapon is not the rifle, it's judgment, when to act, when to stay silent, and when silence itself becomes betrayal. She asked herself, had she betrayed her place by speaking out, or had she betrayed herself by staying quiet for too long? The answer came sooner than she expected. Days later, the emergency alarm shattered the base's rhythm. Not a drill, not an exercise. A helicopter down, stranded on a ridge. One passenger gravely injured. The storm moving fast, time running out. The rescue plan was fragile, dangerous. It required precision observation from Peak 7, range calculation, real-time adjustments, flawless communication to guide another helicopter through the storm. The role demanded absolute skill, absolute calm. A mistake would mean death. Looked to his roster. Most marksmen were deployed, few were available. Stepped forward, his confidence rehearsed. Sir, I'll take the mission. But everyone in that room knew his performance under pressure. They knew the cracks, and yet he was still an officer. He had the credentials. The system bent toward him. Felt her heartbeat pound in her ears. She heard her uncle's voice. When silence costs lives, you must break it. She rose to her feet. Her voice cut through the room, steady, calm, undeniable. Sir, I volunteer. The air stilled. Heads turned. Faces showed disbelief, irritation, even laughter. Eyes narrowed, smirked, shaking his head as if amused by a child's game. But Colonel, the base commander, studied her differently. Not with dismissal, with calculation, with curiosity. And in that moment, the fuse was lit. What happens when the invisible step into the light? Some are welcomed, most are burned. When stood and volunteered for the rescue mission, the air in the briefing room turned sharp. Soldiers shifted in their seats, some smirking, some frowning, most unable to believe what they had just heard. Major's face hardened. He had spent years building walls between combat and logistics, warriors and administrators, and now one of his own clerks had dared to climb over them. This is not your place, he said, his voice measured but his eyes blazing. This mission requires proven experience, not enthusiasm. Held his stare, though her stomach twisted. She spoke softly but with conviction. Sir, I have the skills, precision shooting, observation, alpine conditions. My qualifications exceed those of the alternatives. The room rippled with disbelief. A few officers chuckled. Lieutenant leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his smirk sharp as a blade. He said, his tone oozing condescension, "You manage paperwork. You don't manage life-and-death missions." But then Colonel spoke. Her voice was calm, deliberate, carrying a weight that silenced the laughter. If you claim these qualifications, specialist, then you will prove them. Now, publicly, before the entire base. And with that, there was no going back. Word spread like wildfire. By the time walked toward Range Complex Delta, soldiers and officers lined the walkways. Curiosity buzzed like static in the alpine air. The armory clerk was about to be tested on ground normally reserved for elite candidates. Some came to watch her fail. Others, quietly, to see if the whispers were true. At the firing line, targets stretched from 800 to 1,200 meters, electronic scoring rigs glowing under the mountain sun. Standard rifles had been laid out, identical ammunition stacked neatly. No excuses, no advantages, just raw skill. Laid out the terms with clipped precision. Each shooter will engage 10 targets at distances from 800 to 1,200 meters. 15 minutes. Accuracy, consistency, completion under simulated stress. This is not a game. This is mission qualification. He didn't have to say what everyone already knew. This was also a trial of legitimacy. If she failed, she would not only lose the mission, she would be broken, humiliated, erased. Stepped forward first. His body language was theater, sharp posture, deliberate movements, the air of someone performing confidence rather than inhabiting it. He set up quickly, speaking as he worked, as if narrating for the crowd. Extreme range marksmanship is about composure under pressure, he declared. Something not everyone here has. His glance at was obvious. His first shots were solid at 800 meters, good enough to pass basic standards, but as the range increased, his performance faltered. At 1,000 meters, his grouping widened. At 1,200, wind calculations slipped, his shots drifting outside critical zones. He finished with a score that met the minimum. Competent, yes, but not flawless, not extraordinary. The crowd clapped politely. It was respect for effort, not admiration for mastery. Then stepped forward. She did not perform, she prepared. Her hands moved with the calm economy of someone who knew the weapon like a second skin. She checked barrel temperature, scope alignment, bipod stability, details even seasoned candidates sometimes ignored. Master Sergeant, the senior armorer, watched closely, his brows lifting in surprise. She knows what she's doing, he muttered to no one in particular. The crowd quieted. A strange tension filled the space. Lay prone, cheek resting against the stock, her body aligning with the rifle as naturally as breath. She let the world narrow to scope, wind, distance, heartbeat. Her first shot rang out. The display lit green, dead center at 800 meters. Her second, another center. By the fifth shot, whispers surged through the watching crowd. Consistency like this wasn't luck. It wasn't chance. It was mastery. At 1,000 meters, she adjusted smoothly, compensating for a shifting gust that had thrown shot wide earlier. Her bullet cut through the wind as though it had been waiting for her. Another hit, precise. At 1,200, she exhaled, slowed her pulse until her body was stone. The shot cracked. The target registered dead center. Perfect. 10 shots, 10 hits, 21 in total when they tallied extended sequences. Flawless, a record. The crowd erupted, not in cheers but in stunned silence. Silence heavier than applause. The kind of silence that meant assumptions had been shattered. Major's jaw tightened. He looked not at the score but at the faces of his soldiers, knowing something had slipped beyond his control. Colonel nodded slightly, her expression unreadable but her eyes sharp with calculation. Was pale. His smirk was gone, replaced with anger masked as outrage. "This is unacceptable," he snapped. "Unauthorized training doesn't make her qualified. She broke regulations. She cheated the system." Colonel turned her gaze on him, her words precise as a scalpel. "Lieutenant, are you suggesting we ignore demonstrated capability because it didn't follow your preferred path? In crisis, lives care little for protocols. They care only for results." The rebuke cut deep, fell silent, his jaw working but no words emerging. Stood slowly, lowering her face calm though her chest raced. She wanted to breathe in the vindication, but she didn't, because she knew this was not victory. It was only survival. For every record she had just set, every shot that had silenced doubt, there would be backlash, envy, resistance. And yet, when Colonel spoke the words that followed, the weight of them shifted everything. Martinez, she used her family name deliberately. Formally, you are assigned to the observation mission on Peak 7. Prepare your gear. The decision was final. The murmurs in the crowd surged, shock mixing with admiration. Bristled, his authority undercut, his protest barely restrained. Colonel, with respect. Cut him off. Respect is measured in results, Major, and I've just seen results that none of your officers have matched today. The order stood. As the crowd dispersed, whispers followed like shadows. Some carried awe, others carried resentment. Every step she took toward the armory felt heavier, as though the ground itself demanded proof of her worth. In the quiet of the equipment room, she packed her gear. Standard issue wasn't enough. She needed precision, stability, resilience against the storm. She worked methodically, each adjustment echoing the lessons had drilled into her on frozen weekends far from here. She heard his voice in her mind. The rifle doesn't care who you are. The target doesn't care about your rank. The only thing that matters is the shot, and the shot is always honest. But as she zipped the final pouch, her reflection in the steel cabinet stopped her. She saw the uniform, the insignia, the face that was no longer invisible. She saw the weight of expectation, of scrutiny, of every eye now watching not for her silence, but for her stumble. She whispered to herself, almost a prayer, "Don't stumble, not now." Outside, the helicopter blades began to spin. The storm loomed over the mountains, clouds rolling like a tide. Time was running short for the stranded passengers on the ridge. And the invisible clerk who had just broken a major's hand and a base's pride walked toward the aircraft, alone, determined, and for the first time undeniable. But there was something no one had yet asked her, something she had not yet revealed, had trained her for shots, for wind, for cold, for silence. But had he truly trained her for what came after the shot, for the weight of lives depending not on hitting paper targets, but on being the thin thread between survival and death? She didn't know, not yet. And as the helicopter lifted into the storm, neither did anyone else. How does courage feel when it's no longer hypothetical? When the helicopter lifted off, stomach tightened, her body pressed into the seat as the rotors tore at the alpine air. The base fell away beneath her, swallowed by white slopes and jagged peaks. Ahead, the storm rolled in heavy and dark, a wall of shifting snow and cloud. She had been flawless on the range, but this was not the range. This was life, and life didn't care about records. The pilots said little, their eyes locked on the storm's edge. They had flown these mountains for years and knew what was coming: a narrowing window, turbulence strong enough to flip steel, winds that cut visibility to nothing. This wasn't just a flight. It was a race against time, and the finish line was a stranded helicopter with one passenger bleeding out on a ridge too remote for ground teams. His hand stayed calm in her lap, but inside her chest a war raged. She could still hear his voice. Shooting paper is one thing. Shooting when lives depend on it, that is the true weight. She had carried that lesson in theory. Now she would carry it in reality. The chopper bucked as it hit the storm front, a violent lurch that snapped helmets against harnesses, gripped her gear tightly. Snowflakes whipped across the cockpit glass, a blinding curtain. The pilot shouted over the comms, "2 minutes to Peak 7, we can't stay long." When the aircraft flared onto the mountain summit, the landing was more a controlled crash than precision. The skids bit into ice, tilting dangerously before settling. The door slid open. Freezing air clawed its face, raw and merciless. She shouldered her pack, this weight pulling on her like an anchor, and leapt into the storm. The helicopter lifted away instantly, its silhouette vanishing into white. Suddenly she was alone. The wind screamed. Snow tore at her goggles. The world shrank to gray sky, white ground, and the ridge where she would build her observation post. She crouched low, moving with deliberate care, every step measured against the invisible drop that lurked beyond the slope. Her lungs burned, her fingers numbed, but she pressed on, the mountain itself testing if she belonged. She found the ridge, an outcrop overlooking the valley and the stranded helicopter far below. Its rotor blades were still, half buried in snow, the shape of it like a frozen carcass. She could see figures moving around it, frantic, small against the storm. One of them was bleeding badly. They didn't have hours. They had minutes. Set her pack down, methodical even as urgency clawed at her. She assembled her hands steady despite the cold. Every motion echoed training, barrel alignment, bipod placement, scope adjustments. She checked wind, but here wind wasn't a variable. It was a force of nature. The gale screamed across the ridge, unpredictable, violent. She felt it in her bones, in her teeth. She steadied her breath, aligning the crosshairs on the crash site. But this was not about pulling a trigger. This was about calculation, observation, guidance. Her role was not to end lives, but to preserve them. She would guide the rescue helicopter in, thread it through the storm, direct it with precision as if the air itself were her target. Her radio crackled. "Observation post, this is base. Do you copy?" She pressed her mic, voice calm though her heart hammered. "Copy, post established. Visual on crash site confirmed. Stand by for coordinates." She gave them range, wind, velocity, elevation. Her words were crisp, each calculation born of hundreds of hours unseen. The pilots acknowledged, their tone tense but steady. Minutes passed like hours. Snow thickened, the crash site fading in and out of view, fought the elements, adjusting, recalculating, relaying data. Once the valley disappeared entirely, swallowed in white. Panic threatened, sharp and sudden. She closed her eyes, inhaled, exhaled. The rifle doesn't care if you're cold, the target doesn't care if you're afraid. His voice again. She opened her eyes, the target was back, so was she. "Approach vector set," she called over the radio. "Maintain heading 370, adjust altitude -50. The rescue helicopter emerged from the storm like a ghost, blades fighting the air. Tracked it, feeding corrections, steady, precise. Too high and it would vanish into cloud. Too low and the ridge would claim it. Every adjustment mattered. Every word she spoke held weight. Then trouble. The wind shifted violently, slamming the aircraft sideways. Its nose dipped, skids catching the edge of the ridge. For one breathless second it teetered. Death hovered. His voice cut sharp and clear. "Bank left 3 degrees now." The pilot obeyed. The helicopter steadied, rising just enough to clear the jagged rocks. The ridge let go. The aircraft leveled. The stranded soldiers below cheered faintly, barely audible through the storm, but didn't cheer. Her eyes stayed on the scope, her breath controlled. There was no room for celebration yet. Minutes bled into each other. One survivor, then another, loaded into the helicopter. The injured man last, his body limp, his comrades struggling to lift him into the hold. The rescue bird wavered dangerously under the added weight. Tracked every second. She saw turbulence before the pilots felt it, called corrections that kept steel from smashing against rock. When at last the helicopter lifted free of the ridge, survivors aboard exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. The radio crackled again. "Observation, this is rescue. All survivors secured, returning to base. Couldn't have done it without you." For a moment she couldn't answer. Her throat tightened, her chest heavy with something larger than pride. Relief, vindication, humanity. She pressed the mic. "Copy, rescue, safe flight." And then silence. She remained on the ridge long after the rotor wash had faded, kneeling in snow, the steady at her side. The storm raged around her, but she was still, her body trembling now not from cold but from the release of pressure. For the first time she understood what it meant. Paper targets didn't bleed. Paper targets didn't die. These people, these fragile lives, had depended on her voice, her calculations, her calm, and they had lived. When the extraction helicopter returned for her, she climbed aboard with quiet steps. The pilots glanced back, nodding once, no words spoken. Some things didn't need words. Back at base, the story spread faster than the storm. The clerk who had saved a crew, the administrator who had guided a helicopter through death. She walked across the tarmac, soldiers parting, whispers following, some with admiration, some with envy, some with fear. Major was waiting. His face was carved in stone, unreadable. Colonel stood beside him, her arms crossed, her gaze sharp. Saluted, reporting in her voice steady though her legs felt like stone. Mission accomplished, all survivors evacuated. Nodded once, well done. Said nothing. His silence was louder than any words. That night in the solitude of her bunk lay awake. Her body ached, her mind replayed every second of the mission. The voice in her head was or evens. It was. Every shot must be deliberate, every action justified. And remember, the weapon chooses its user as much as the user chooses the weapon. She closed her eyes. She wasn't sure if they had chosen her or if the storm had, but something had. And tomorrow, the base would no longer look at her as invisible. They would look at her as something else entirely. But what they saw and what she truly was would not be the same thing. What happens after a miracle? Do doors finally open, or do they close than before? When the base woke the next morning was no longer invisible. Her name moved through the corridors like contraband. Some spoke it with awe, others with envy, many with resentment. She had guided men out of death's grip, proven herself in a storm no one else would have survived. And yet, instead of lifting her, the weight of her actions pressed heavier than ever. At the morning briefing, eyes turned toward her as she entered. Whispers cut off mid-sentence. Soldiers shifted, making space yet keeping distance, as though her presence carried some unseen contagion. Colonel sat at the head of the table, her expression neutral, her fingers steepled. Beside her, Major looked carved from stone, every muscle in his jaw set against the storm raging inside him. The debrief began. The pilots praised her precision. The rescued crew that without her voice, they would have died on that ridge. Every word confirmed what the entire base already knew. She had done the impossible. Stern came last. His report was clinical, stripped of emotion, a skeleton of facts. He acknowledged her role, but only as adequate support. No mention of skill, no recognition of initiative. He spoke as though the storm had been mild, the mission routine, her involvement a footnote. Listened in silence. She did not argue, she knew better, but silence was not surrender, it was her shield. Colonel's gaze flicked between them, reading the tension, filing it away. When the meeting ended, she dismissed everyone except. The room emptied, the door closed, silence. Leaned back, studying her with sharp, calculating eyes. You know what you've done, don't you? Held her gaze. I followed orders, I completed the mission. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, though her tone remained hard. No, you've done more than that. You've disrupted balance. You've challenged the unspoken rules that hold this place together. That makes you dangerous to them, at least. His chest tightened. And to you, ma'am. Smile faded. That depends. I admire results, but admiration doesn't protect anyone. You will need to decide if you want to keep standing out or disappear back into safety. Both paths come with a price. Nodded, her throat dry. I didn't ask for this spotlight. Leaned forward, her voice dropping. Nobody ever does, it finds you. The question is, will you stand in it or turn away? The words lingered long after left the room. That evening in the mess hall, the weight of the spotlight pressed hard. Soldiers sat in clusters, their conversations hushed when she passed. Some eyes followed her with admiration, quiet nods acknowledging what she'd done. Others glared with hostility. Among them, Lieutenant's stare burned the hottest. He rose, approaching her table with deliberate steps. His voice carried loud enough for nearby ears. Tell me, how does it feel to cheat your way into glory, to make yourself the center of attention with tricks and unauthorized training? The hall went still, all eyes shifted to her. Looked up slowly, meeting his stare. Her pulse raced, but her face remained calm. It feels like saving lives, something I hope you'd understand. A few soldiers stifled grins, others widened their eyes at her audacity. Jaw tightened, he leaned closer, his voice low, venomous. You don't belong here, and I'll make sure everyone remembers it. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than his threat. But when he turned and walked away, she felt the weight of truth. He wasn't alone. There were many like him, officers who had climbed through ranks, earned medals, and now saw their authority threatened by someone who wasn't supposed to exist. That night couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing's voice in her mind. Recognition is heavier than anonymity. People want heroes until one stands in front of them. Then they want targets. She closed her eyes. He had been right about everything. The weeks that followed tested her more than the storm had. Tasks piled on her desk, more than usual, menial, exhausting. Inspections of her logs became routine, officers combing for mistakes that weren't there. Rumors spread, whispers of favoritism, of shortcuts, of bending rules. None of it true, but truth was irrelevant when envy held the pen. And yet in quiet corners some soldiers approached her. A young medic, eyes wide with gratitude, whispered, "My brother was on that ridge. He came home because of you. Thank you." A pilot pressed a note into her hand, coordinates, calculations she had made during the mission, scrawled beneath, "Perfect. Don't let them erase this." These moments sustained her, fragile lights against the shadow. But shadows deepened. One morning she was summoned to the range again, not for practice, not for demonstration, but for an evaluation. Himself stood watching, clipboard in hand, flanked by two instructors. "You claim your performance wasn't luck," said coldly. "Then prove it under our terms. You'll fire under stress conditions." They strapped a weighted vest to her chest, added ankle weights, forced her to sprint the length of the range before lying prone. Her breath heaved, muscles burned, heart hammered. The rifle felt heavier than before, the scope trembling slightly. "Fire," ordered. She inhaled, steadied, exhaled. Shot after shot cracked, each one fighting through exhaustion, through shaking arms, through the bitter satisfaction in his eyes. And still her bullets struck true. Not flawless, not a record, but enough. Enough to silence doubt, at least for the moment. Said nothing when it ended. He marked his clipboard, expression unreadable. Smirked, muttered something under his breath and walked away. Collapsed against the chest, rising and falling like a storm-tossed sea. She had passed another test, but tests never ended. That evening she sat alone in the armory, cleaning with slow, deliberate motions. Her reflection in the polished steel caught her, eyes tired, hands raw, shoulders heavy. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "How many times must I prove I belong?" The room answered only with silence. But in her chest, beneath the exhaustion, a quiet flame remained, because she knew the truth. She had guided lives to safety. She had held her ground against storms and suspicion alike. And though they might never grant her the title, she had already earned the role. Still, the question lingered. How long could she endure a system determined to push her back into invisibility? And what would happen when the next storm came, not of weather, but of war? She didn't know, but something inside her whispered that the storm was already on its way. What happens when the storm you feared finally arrives? Not of snow, not of wind, but of war. It began in the early hours before dawn when the base alarms wailed. Not a drill, not an exercise. Red lights washed over the barracks, boots thundering down corridors, voices sharp and urgent. Snapped awake, her body still aching from weeks of quiet battles, but her mind instantly clear. Something had broken the fragile rhythm of the base. She threw on her gear, heart pounding, stepping into a corridor alive with tension. Soldiers rushed past, weapons slung, helmets clipped, their faces set. She caught fragments of orders: ambush, patrol down, hostiles still active. The words struck cold. This wasn't training. This was real. By the time she reached the operations room, the air was heavy with urgency. Maps lit the wall, radios crackled with broken transmissions. Colonel stood at the center, calm amid chaos, her voice cutting through the noise. "We have a stranded patrol pinned down in Sector 12. Hostile fire from elevated ridges. We cannot extract without overwatch. Precision is non-negotiable." Eyes flicked toward, he straightened, eager, ready to claim the assignment. "I'll take the team, ma'am." But didn't answer him immediately. Her gaze shifted slowly, deliberately, too. The room stiffened. Eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "Martinez," said, her tone neutral but edged, "you're on overwatch. You'll shadow the patrol team and keep their corridor clear. No mistakes." The room stirred, shock, disbelief. A murmur of protest from "Colonel, with respect, she's never." "Enough," cut him off. "She's proven capable, and tonight we need capable." The order stood. Felt her stomach drop. This wasn't the Ridge. This wasn't guiding a rescue through storm. This was combat, unforgiving, merciless. Her hands tingled, her pulse a hammer in her throat. She nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Moments later, she was in the transport vehicle, packed shoulder to shoulder with soldiers whose faces were carved from tension. The air smelled of metal and sweat, the hum of the engine mixing with the low clatter of weapons. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The silence said everything. The vehicle jolted to a stop, doors flung open. Cold night air rushed in, sharp and unforgiving. The patrol leader motioned. "Positions, now." Slung its weight grounding her, a familiar anchor in unfamiliar chaos. She broke from the group, moving toward the high ridge that overlooked the kill zone. Each step was a war between fear and focus. His voice returned in fragments. "Your heartbeat is the enemy. Slow it. Breathe through the fear. The shot doesn't care if your hands shake." She crawled onto the ridge, laying prone, her body aligning with the rifle. Below, she saw the pinned patrol, 4 soldiers crouched behind jagged rocks, tracer rounds slicing the night around them. From higher ground, muzzle flashes flared like fireflies, hostile shooters raining fire. Adjusted her scope. The storm of bullets blurred into focus. One shooter at 900 meters, barely visible through smoke. Another at 1,000, shifting position. Her chest tightened. These weren't paper silhouettes. These were men, alive, moving, shooting. Her finger hesitated on the trigger. The moment she pulled, she would cross a threshold that could never be uncrossed. "Paper doesn't bleed," his voice whispered. Below, a soldier screamed, a round grazing his leg, blood dark against rock. Time vanished. Choice dissolved. Only necessity remained. Steadied, exhaled, fired. The rifle cracked, thunder rolling through the valley. Through the scope, she saw the hostile fall back, rifle clattering away. Silence followed for a breath, then chaos resumed. Her stomach twisted, bile rising. Her first real shot, not a drill, not practice. A life ended through her crosshairs. But below, the pinned patrol had room to move. They scrambled, shifting position. Her action had bought them seconds. She forced herself steady, scanning. Another muzzle flash, adjust, calculate, fire, another down. The battlefield moved differently now, alive, unpredictable, every decision weighted with consequence. She was no longer proving herself. She was holding lives in her hands, her scope the difference between survival and death. Minutes stretched like hours. Each shot tore at her, each breath heavier. Her arms ached, her chest burned, but she stayed locked. Focus. Breathe. Fire. Again and again until the ridge fell quiet, muzzle flashes gone. The radio crackled. "Overwatch, this is patrol, corridor clear, moving to extraction, you saved us." She swallowed hard, her throat tight, unable to answer. Her finger hovered over the mic, but words refused to come. Finally, she forced them out, low, steady. "Copy. Safe return." The patrol, The battlefield stilled. Snow drifted quietly over rocks now smeared with shadows. She lay prone long after it was over, her body trembling. She had done what she had been trained to do, what she had always dreamed of doing. And yet it didn't feel like victory. It felt like weight, heavy, suffocating weight. When the transport carried them back to base, the soldiers glanced at her differently. Respect lingered in their eyes, quiet and unspoken, but she couldn't meet their gaze. Not yet. Back in her quarters, she sat alone, rifle disassembled before her. She cleaned it slowly, hands mechanical, mind replaying the night. Each shot, each fall, each echo of a life that would never rise again. His voice haunted her still. A marksman must live with the truth of their shot, every time, forever. She understood now, truly. At dawn, Colonel called her into her office. The room was dim, blinds drawn, the weight of the night still heavy in the air. Studied her carefully. "You performed," she said simply. "The patrol is alive because of you." Nodded once, unable to speak. "But performance comes with cost," added, her voice quieter. "I see it in your eyes. This is your burden now. Carry it with dignity. Don't let them use it against you." Swallowed hard, "Yes, ma'am." As she left the office, she felt eyes on her from across the hall. Not admiration, not respect, but calculation. He had seen her survive the ridge. He had seen her endure combat, and in his silence she heard the promise of more trials to come. The storm had broken, but another was already building. What happens when strength is undeniable? Do those in power embrace it, or do they try to destroy it? Walked the base like a shadow with light clinging to her. Soldiers she barely knew nodded as she passed. Some spoke her name with quiet respect, their voices carrying fragments of gratitude. She saved us. She held the ridge. She didn't break. For the first time since stepping into the uniform, she wasn't invisible. And yet visibility was its own prison. Every glance held meaning, admiration, envy, suspicion. She felt their weight pressing from all sides. For every life she had saved, she sensed another officer sharpening their knives, eager to remind her she didn't belong. No blade was sharper than silence. The major had stopped speaking her name altogether. Orders that required her involvement were filtered through subordinates. Briefings excluded her until the last minute. Reports she submitted were marked with red ink that corrected nothing. It was a war of erosion, steady and unrelenting, designed to grind her down. On the other hand, was not silent. His words filled mess halls and corridors, carefully chosen, casually poisonous. "You heard she froze after her first shot, right? Almost lost the whole patrol. They say she trained with family. No wonder her methods are questionable." His tone always held the hint of a joke, a smirk that let him deny it was sabotage. But the damage spread. Rumors travel faster than truth. Endured it quietly. She worked harder, trained longer, tested her calculations against shifting winds and terrain. She told herself results would silence everything. But results weren't always enough. Not when ambition and pride were threatened. One evening, as she cleaned under the harsh light of the armory, Sergeant stepped in. He closed the door behind him, his weathered face lined with unease. "You need to be careful," he said, voice low. Looked up, pausing mid-motion. "Careful of what?" Shifted, glancing at the door. They don't just want to discredit you. They want you gone. They've been pushing for a review, arguing your presence compromises discipline. And worse, I heard whispers they're arranging something in the field, a test you can't pass." Her chest tightened. A trap. He didn't answer directly. His silence was confirmation enough. She stared at the rifle in her hands, the steel reflecting her tired eyes. A trap meant more than humiliation. It meant danger, real, deliberate, possibly lethal. And yet, what choice did she have? Refuse orders and they'd brand her insubordinate. Accept and she'd be walking into their jaws. His voice rose in her memory. "Some battles you don't choose, they find you. But remember, clarity comes when you accept the price. Are you willing to pay it?" She didn't answer, not even to herself. The test came sooner than expected. At the next briefing, announced it casually as though it were routine. A logistics convoy needs overwatch through Sector 19. High risk of hostile activity. Will assign a marksman. He paused, his eyes cold as stone. Martinez, that will be you. A ripple moved through the room. Officers exchanged glances. Sector 19 was notorious. Dense forest, shifting winds, visibility poor. It wasn't a proving ground. It was a graveyard for precision shooting. Felt the trap close around her, but she didn't flinch. She simply nodded. Yes, sir. That night she prepared in silence. She cleaned double-checked her gear, ran through weather reports, memorized terrain data. She told herself preparation was armor, but deep down, she knew preparation could not blunt sabotage. If they wanted her to fail, they would build failure into the mission. Dawn broke cold and gray as the convoy rolled out. 3 armored trucks, engines rumbling, tires grinding through frost. Rode in the rear vehicle, rifle across her knees, eyes scanning the tree line. The forest closed in quickly, branches clawing at the sky, shadows shifting like phantoms. Every sense sharpened. She watched for muzzle flashes, studied angles, calculated wind that swirled unpredictably between trees. The felt heavier than ever, its weight pressing into her palms like judgment. Then movement, a flicker of light between trunks. She swung the scope, heart hammering. Hostile fighters emerged, rifles raised, ambush triggered. Contact front, voices roared. Gunfire erupted, shattering the morning. Bullets ripped through bark, sparks flying off steel armor. The convoy braked hard, soldiers dismounting, returning fire in chaotic bursts. Hit the ground prone, scope to her eye. She saw them, one shooter at 200 meters, another at 4, moving fast between cover. Her breath steadied. Focus. Calculate. Fire. One down, shift. Fire. Another fell. But the trap revealed itself quickly. Communications crackled static. Her radio link to command cut out, deliberately jammed. Directions came late or not at all. Ammunition crates in her pack were miscounted, rounds missing. Her support vanished, leaving her exposed. And still she fought. Her shots cleared paths for the convoy, her voice steady over local comms even as chaos raged. Vehicle 2, push forward. Left flank clear, move. Her calculations saved seconds, and seconds saved lives. But the battle was stacked against her. Hostiles pressed harder, their fire coordinated, precise. She realized with a sickening clarity, someone had fed them her position. The ambush wasn't just coincidence, it was designed. A round cracked past her head, close enough to sting her ear. She rolled, heart pounding, lungs burning, fear gnawing at the edges of her resolve. She almost froze, almost. But then she thought of the patrol she had saved, of the helicopter crew, of words. Fear is natural. What matters is what you do while afraid. She steadied, fired again, cleared another threat. The firefight stretched on, brutal and unrelenting. By the time the convoy broke free of the kill zone, smoke and silence hung heavy in the forest. Bodies littered the ground, shadows between roots and rocks. Her arms trembled as she lowered the rifle. Her uniform was streaked with mud, her face raw from wind and adrenaline. The convoy rolled forward, engines growling back to life, soldiers slamming doors shut. No one spoke. The silence was thicker than victory. Back at base, the report was filed with chilling efficiency. Noted performance adequate but compromised under pressure. Addendum claimed communication failures likely due to Martinez's inexperience. The truth was twisted before it touched paper. Read the words in silence, her chest tight. She had survived their trap, but survival wasn't the same as freedom. Their knives were still out, sharper than ever. That night she sat alone in the armory, staring at her reflection stared back, eyes darker, shoulders heavier, silence louder. She whispered into the empty room, "They want me broken, but I'm still here. Still here, still standing, still undeniable." But deep down, she knew one thing. The next trap would not just test her, it would decide everything. How many battles can someone endure before they decide who they truly are? Had survived storms, sabotage, and shadows of war. She had carried lives through her scope and shouldered burdens meant to break her. Yet the weight didn't ease. It grew heavier with every step, every glance, every whisper. She was no longer invisible, but visibility had made her a target. Major's silence was colder than ice now. He refused her in meetings, her credit twisted reports until truth disappeared. Lieutenant sharpened his ridicule, his words dripping with venom, spreading like infection through the ranks. The more she proved herself, the more they resisted. And then came the mission that would decide everything. It arrived as a late-night briefing, urgency humming in the operations room. Colonel laid out the situation. A NATO delegation traveling through the valley had been compromised. Hostile forces were moving fast, setting up ambush points along their extraction corridor. The delegation was valuable, symbolically, politically, strategically. Losing them would ripple far beyond these mountains. The assignment was clear. Precision overwatch was required. A marksman to secure the corridor to ensure the convoy reached safety. Lives, reputations, alliances, everything balanced on one role. Spoke before anyone else. "We'll take the post," he declared firmly, as though it were already decided. The room was silent. Soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. His eyes flicked toward, for a moment time held. Then she spoke softly, cutting through's command. "No, Martinez will take it." The words dropped like a stone into still water. His face tightened, his voice sharp with restrained fury. "Colonel, with respect." "With respect," interrupted, her voice calm but unyielding. "I have seen her results when it mattered. This is not about politics, it's about survival. She takes the post." The decision was final. Felt the eyes of the room on her as she nodded once. Her throat was dry but her voice steady. "Yes, ma'am." That night she prepared with deliberate calm, every round inspected, every scope adjustment precise. Her hands moved as though guided by ritual, the lessons had etched into her bones, surfacing with clarity. The shot must be honest, even if the world around it is not. Before dawn she was in position, high above the valley, snow biting at her face, the steady beneath her. Through her scope, she saw the convoy winding its way along the narrow road, armored vehicles crawling like beetles against the white landscape. And then she saw them. Hostiles hidden in, rifles braced, waiting, dozens of them, far more than intelligence had suggested. The trap was set, brutal and merciless. Her radio crackled. His voice, "Martinez, you are clear to engage, cover the convoy." Inhaled, exhaled, steadied her scope. The first shot cracked, dropping a rifleman before his finger could squeeze. Another followed, then another, each shot deliberate, precise, carving space for the convoy to move. She adjusted constantly, tracking shifting wind, compensating for distance, her focus absolute. But the hostiles pressed harder, more than she could stop alone. The convoy slowed, pinned by fire from multiple angles. Smoke filled the valley, tracer rounds slicing the dawn. Her chest tightened. She couldn't hold them all, not like this. And then the sabotage revealed itself. Her comms cut out, static, deliberate interference. She could hear nothing from the convoy, nothing from alone again, always alone. She clenched her jaw, bile rising. They had set her up. Hand was in this, she knew it. If she failed now, if the delegation fell, blame would land squarely on her shoulders. Fear clawed at her, whispering failure. But then another voice rose stronger, his voice calm and steady. "You cannot control betrayal. You can only control your shot. And dignity doesn't speak. It acts." Her decision crystallized. She broke from protocol, abandoned the static-filled comms. She switched frequencies, linked directly to the convoy's commander, bypassing the chain of command entirely. Her voice cut sharp into their headsets. "Convoy, this is Overwatch. Left ridge 600 meters neutralized. Push forward now. Do not stop. Repeat, do not stop. The commander didn't question. He obeyed. The convoy surged forward, wheels grinding through snow, pushing past ambush points. Cleared threats with surgical precision, every shot timed to their movement. A sniper lining up on the lead vehicle down. A rocket team bracing at the curve, eliminated before they could fire. Her breath was shallow, her arms aching, but she did not falter. She became rhythm, calculation, inevitability. Minutes stretched like hours. By the time the convoy broke free of the valley, smoke trailed behind it, but the vehicles were intact. The delegation alive. Mission complete. Exhaled, lowering the snow fell quietly around her, the silence of the mountains returning. Back at base, the atmosphere was electric. The convoy commander's report left no doubt. Without her, the delegation would have been slaughtered. Her precision had carried them through. Soldiers spoke her name openly now, admiration in their voices. Some even smiled when she passed. But in the operations room, the storm broke. Slammed the report onto the table, his voice sharp. She broke protocol. She abandoned assigned channels. She disobeyed direct structure. This cannot stand. Colonel's reply was cold steel. She saved the convoy. She saved lives. She succeeded where others would have failed. And you, Major, your channels failed her. The room fell silent. Shifted uncomfortably, his face pale, his smirk long gone. For the first time, authority cracked in plain view. His silence was not power now. It was defeat. That night sat alone in the armory, the blade across her knees. She traced a finger along its steel, her reflection staring back. Tired eyes, worn hands, a soul changed. She thought of his lessons, of the storms she had walked through, of snow, of politics, of betrayal, of war. And she realized something. Recognition didn't matter. Neither did approval. What mattered was that when lives were on the line, she had acted, not with speeches, not with pride, with precision, with quiet resilience. She whispered into the stillness, a truth as much for herself as for anyone else. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The rifle gleamed under the dim light, honest as always. And outside, the mountain stood silent, bearing witness to the woman who had finally claimed her place, not by asking, not by demanding, but by refusing to break.